Did I scare you? Well, it scares me every time I look in the mirror. So it's June outside. Why am I talking about Halloween? Well, only because Halloween is like the greatest holiday of the year. It's my absolute favorite. Despite this, I never seem to really do anything. The most I do is dress up in costume and criticize all the little kids that come through in a long string of dressed like Disney characters. Although for the record, there were these two girls that came dressed as a washer and dryer, which I thought was awesome. So this year is going to be different. I have at least 4 really good ideas to do to the front of my house to make it really spectacular. So this is the first in a series of videos that I'm going to do building that kind of stuff. So I've scoured the internet for all kinds of little ideas that I think are high quality and achievable for me. Some of them are subtle and others not so subtle. Today's is actually kind of a mixture of both. I think you'll see what I mean by the time we get further into the project. So how did I do it? Well, I'd love to take credit, but I can't. On the other hand, if you want to give me credit, I'll be more than happy to accept it. What I did is I went to a site which is one of my favorites called Instructables, and there was a guy there who walked through this process. Now, you could say, why don't I just follow his process? And you could do that, but I actually had a few issues, and so I thought I would do this and show you my issues and walk you through it. I like to make my videos as though you're a complete noob on how to do any of this, which is, what I usually am when I do it. So I can maybe walk you through some of the little mistakes or the little places that he, little blanks that he left unfilled. So let's get started. So I'll put a link in the description that can lead you to the site where I found all this stuff. I generally don't like to do a here's what you need to build this thing. I'm like, just build it and then I'll figure out what I need. I mean, I have a lot of crap laying around the house anyway. I probably have half that stuff. In this case, however, you do need some stuff that's pretty specialized, the first of which is a Raspberry Pi. If you don't know what a Raspberry Pi is, get off my channel. No, I'm kidding. They're all over the place. If you look them up, you're going to get so many hits, you could spend your life looking at them. But so I'll just quickly say that it's a SBC, single board computer. Yep, that's right. This little tiny thing is a whole computer. It comes with 4 USB ports and Ethernet. It's got onboard Wi-Fi. It can toast bread and all that stuff. Wouldn't recommend it as your sole computer. It's not very powerful, but for 35 bucks, it gets you pretty far, and you get a free operating system called Linux. That's where most of the problems come from. Linux is great, don't get me wrong, but I'll get into some of the issues I had with that, especially if you're a noob. If you know Linux, then none of this is a problem. 35 bucks. That's the board. Go get one. When you get one, you're also going to need to get one of these. And it's one of those wall war things, but everybody says on the internet for this version, which is the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus, it's kind of the latest one right now, 2019, mid 2019, that it requires a slightly more powerful one. You should get the official one. This is an official one. I actually couldn't get one. I usually go to a place called Adafruit, not sponsored. They just have a lot of cool stuff like this, and they were out of stock. In fact, they're out of stock on a lot of things, and I'm not sure why. So anywho, that's like another 10 bucks. So you're talking like 45 bucks now, I guess. You're also going to need a PIR sensor. Don't be afraid, it won't hurt you. 10 bucks, you get like 5 of them on Amazon, 3 of them won't work. But you should be able to get one of them working. The very first one I tried actually worked. So I'll put a link there as well, although the guy had a link in his description, and you're going to be following his stuff while you do this if you want to follow along with me. The other is a little bit more obscure, I would say, and that is the cable that attaches the two. I hope this is in focus. It's so hard to tell on this little screen, but I repurposed one. So mine, I'm going to come even closer, has 4 pins. You can see one sort of hanging off there. But if you look, there are only 3 wires. And I needed 3 wires in a row. And this little cable had like 2 wires, a space, and then a wire. So it's just a computer cable that you use to light up LEDs and things like that, or the front panel buttons. So you could use something like that, and I had to modify mine. Because there were 4 spaces, I need 3 right next to each other. I de-pinned it very, very carefully, and it's not easy actually. I broke one. I had a few of these. And I moved it over so that the pins were in the right spot. And on the other side, they're not in a row. So I actually wound up cutting where that extra one was and making like 2 little connectors out of one. So point is, if you may not have something like this laying around, you may need to go buy the little cables to put on these little pins. or else you're not going to be able to hook one to the other unless you want to like solder or something, which, you know, I might want to use this for something else and I don't want to mess it up. So those pieces are important and you need to go shopping and get those. I almost forgot, two other things you might need, or you will need, are a computer monitor and some kind of a frame, assuming you want to make this thing look like a picture. In my case, I had an old monitor laying around. I think if you don't and you want to buy one, well, that's going to affect your cost, of course. And I had a frame that was almost the perfect size, and it looked perfect too. I'll show it to you later, but unfortunately, it didn't quite fit right. I couldn't make it fit. So I'm going to go to the store and either try and find one that will, or I'm going to like build one out of trim pieces or something. We'll see how that goes. You're also going to need a micro SD card. Can't see that? I didn't think so. Everybody knows what a micro SD card is, because it won't focus. It's one of those little ones you put in your phone, and that's where I encountered my very first problem, because step one in the process was get your Raspberry Pi up and running. He doesn't go into that because that wasn't the purpose of his little tutorial. But that's fraught with a few issues. Generally speaking, things go really well. In my case, I had a 64 gigabyte micro SD card available to me, so I decided to use that one. Now, here's the problem. The Raspberry Pi requires you to use a smaller card. It has to be formatted as FAT32. When you format a card that is 64 gig, actually I think it's 32 gig or above, it automatically formats as exFAT, and it doesn't read that. So what you need to do is go in and format your card, and I'll show some video of me doing that right now. Well, mine was already formatted as FAT32. My head's cut off. The things you have to do to make a video, you know? Mine was already formatted as FAT32, so I went ahead and just put the program on there, the operating system on there, stuck it in, and absolutely nothing happened. Just blackness. I mean, literally nothing happened. So I started going to the internet and trying to figure out what went wrong, and it turns out that your card has to be formatted as FAT32, which it was. So I formatted it again, put the operating system on there, and then it worked. So go figure. I guess the lesson learned here is that you're going to have to basically format the card right before you do any of this stuff. You might as well just go straight to that step. Now, the regular formatting routine that they recommend you use for Linux won't do that. So they recommend another one for cards that are larger than 32 gigabytes. So I'll show you that one as well. So step one, format your SD card with FAT32. Format your SD card using their regular tool. Put the operating system on it that you get from a place called raspberrypi.org, I believe. There'll be links for all this stuff. And get it on your little tiny micro SD card. So it's not really step two, but it's probably the next place that you might get hung up. He mentions using SSH, which is a secure shell. It's a way of accessing, one computer accesses another computer over an insecure connection, kind of like the internet. And that's how he was going to set everything up, and then he says absolutely nothing more about it. He gives a link on how to set that up, but it doesn't explain, you know, how to use it or anything else about it. I mean, I didn't know, and if you're a noob, you're not going to know, so that may be a bunch of research you're going to have to do if you want to use that method. I decided I don't need any of that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hook up my keyboard, I'm going to hook up my mouse, I'm going to get the thing running, and I'm just going to unplug them. Or I'm going to shove them behind the decorations somewhere where people can't see them, and I'm going to let it scare kids until it has a problem. And then I'll just grab the keyboard and mouse again and fix that problem on the spot. It's just going to be on my front porch, so I don't really need a wireless connection to the computer to do this kind of stuff. And I figured that's one headache that I don't need, and I didn't need to learn how to use it because I don't know, but I'm guessing you're going to have to open up some kind of a terminal and go in there and type some obscure code. So if you're like me, just avoid it. So the next step is to open up a terminal. He says that very nonchalantly, like you're just going to know how to open up a terminal and type in a bunch of archaic codes. Well, if you're like me and you don't know, here's how you do it. It's really simple. So I know I skipped a step about installing the operating system on the Raspberry Pi, and that's because there are many guides out there on how to do it, and I didn't have any trouble with that step by following those guides. I didn't give you a link. I could probably put a link in the description as long as I remember. But I didn't actually use one. I kind of looked around and found a number of guides that I used to do it, and it worked just fine. So I don't think I need to explain anything there. Just go find yourself a guide how to install Raspian on a Raspberry Pi, and you shouldn't have any trouble. What I can tell you though is it takes a really long time. So get it all set up and walk away, because and go watch a movie, or like Lord of the Rings like movie, because it took like, I want to say it took 3 hours. I'm not sure, because I went away and I kind of lost track of time, so I'm not really sure how long it actually took. But it did take quite a long time, and there will be a period of time where it looks like it's not doing anything. Don't be afraid. Just let it sit for a while and make sure it's really not doing anything before you realize before you think you have a problem. So then I show you how to open a terminal down there, and you type in his obscure code. Sudo, FYI, for the non-Linux users here, is basically telling Linux that you're a super user. And you might think, well, how's that secure? A hacker could just type sudo in front of everything and get in and do whatever he wants. And as it turns out, internal to the cogs of the machine somewhere is a list, and the hacker's not on the list, so he can't just type in sudo. You can, because it's your computer. All right, so that's really unnecessary information. But the first command you type in is that archaic stuff, sudo, python, or Omx, or whatever. He just type in what he's got there. And for me, it actually kind of works. Some people said they had problems, and if you go on his tutorial and look at the bottom at the comments, if you have a problem, somebody there had a problem, like a couple people did. Look at what they did to get them solved, because I really can't help you. So step 3, or 4, or I don't know, I lost track of the steps. But the next 2 steps are the ones that threw me for a loop, and it's funny because they're the easiest steps. He says, go get my script off of GitHub, and he gives you a little link. The other command was, put it somewhere on the computer along with your living portrait thing, which I'll get into in a second. You'd think that'd be easy. In Windows, no problem, I'd just dump it there. But what I encountered was permission denied. You see, I wanted it to be organized, so I decided to create a little folder called Halloween. I was just going to dump any Halloween stuff in there. Well, permission denied, permission denied, permission denied. It kept denying me permission. I went all over the place trying to create a folder in a spot that looked like it'd be the right spot, and I was always denied permission. Why? Well, it was clearly my fault. What happened was, and if this happens to you, this is really important. You can't just create a folder anywhere you want. It's another safety feature. You have to go in and type that sudo command I just told you about that makes you a super user. But that means you have to go into the terminal and start typing a bunch of stuff, and I just wanted to drag and right. You can right click and say create folder, but then it doesn't create it. Here's why. Looks like my tea is done. Where I made my mistake was that I thought I was going to be able to use the operating system very much like I would if I were using Windows. But due to all the security features of Linux, I couldn't do that. And so I kept trying to find a way that I could make myself a super user at all times. Myself being the word Pi in the Raspberry Pi. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out, going on the internet, seeing how I could get access without having to go into the terminal every time. And as it turns out, there's actually an area that you can go to, and I'll show it to you here. And in that area you have free reign, and so I went ahead and was able to easily create the Halloween folder and then drop the files in there and had no problems whatsoever. So if you're in the same boat and you don't really plan on using a computer for anything else but that, and you just need a quick place to put some stuff, then make sure you stay in home/pi/whatever you want to create. In any case, this is the Raspberry Pi with all of its fixins. I'll show you where to plug these guys in for the PIR sensor, passive infrared. I've got an HDMI going to my monitor. It's not an HDMI monitor, it's a VGA, so down here, you can't see it, it's off screen. Now I've got a little adapter, but you're gonna have to use whatever you have or purchase. And then the keyboard and the mouse. And the SD card is actually on the underside. I guess it's right here. Can't see it. And now I'm going to plug it in, and what you'll see is basically a red light will come on, probably violating some kind of rule about having it on the tablecloth here. Got a red and a green light, and then it goes red, and it just basically stays red for all time's sake. There is no power switch, so I have just turned it on. And if you come around the front here, you can see it booting. So this is what it looks like when it boots. And it comes up with a number of options, and that's because I loaded every single option, and it takes up a lot of room on the card. I don't recommend you do this. I recommend you just do the full Raspian load, and then you don't have to wait the 10 seconds for it to go through all that. Also, you're just not going to need it. But make sure you do the full Raspian load, because you're going to need Python, which is what his script is written in, and you're going to need the Omxplayer or whatever it's called that he calls up in that script, and it'll have it in that. But it'll go a lot quicker then, and it won't take up as much room on your card, unless you're planning on doing a bunch of other kind of development. And you also won't get all these icons popping up on the screen that I'm not really going to use for anything. Your screen should be much more clean if you do the install, just the full install of Raspian. The next step involved connecting the PIR sensor. Here's the PIR sensor. It stands for passive infrared. Hope that is in, yep, it looks like it's in focus. Like I said, these are about $10 on Amazon, and they apparently don't work very well. People were really complaining a lot about them. People would say that they had 5 and only 2 of them worked or something. One guy said that none of his seemed to work. And what he did was he played with these potentiometers, which is the sort of the sensitivity, and it turned out it wasn't that it wasn't in adjustment, but rather the potentiometers actually had like a little bad spot on them. So if yours aren't working, tweak those around a little bit and see if you can get them working. At least they're cheap. If you get a really good one, they're much more expensive. And what I found interesting was, where to connect these wires was shown facing the sensor like that, even though you're plugging in from behind. So you have to make sure you sort of reverse your thinking. And when you're facing it this way, the positive, which I've made red on mine, goes on the right side. And then in the middle is your output, which goes to the board. And then on the right is ground. So I've got them basically like a standard. Red is positive, black is negative, and then the white one is going to be my output. And they go in a straight line. And like I said, these cables are, I'm not sure what they're called, but they're used inside of computers to basically connect the motherboard to like the LED on the front of the panel or the power switch or something like that. And they do come in individual pieces, so you can do individual pins, unlike this sort of 4-place one that I have that has 3 wires in it. I recommend you get those because, well, these are in a line and you could do it the way I've done it. Let's get Bugs out of there. Looks like he's been decapitated, doesn't it? Anyway, on this one, they're not in a line. Hopefully you can see that. I'm going to try and bring it in and hope it stays in focus. But the red and the black are pins are next to each other right here, but then you have to go to the other side to put in the white one, or whatever color yours is, the output. And that's how you connect these two together. And I'll show you which pins to connect them to. I'm showing you right here, but if you're having trouble seeing in there, on this side it's actually the 4th one down on the left. In this one, I use the 2nd and the 3rd one. Now, I do believe you can use the 1st one because the first 2 pins, I think, are both +5. And you need a +5 and a ground. But because mine were attached to each other, I just shifted it down since they were both. He says to use pin 2. And the numbering is very odd. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 across like that. Usually headers like this would be just sort of like 1 through 20 this way and then come back down like a book. But in this case, it isn't. So I used the next one down, which is also +5. So he said use pin 2, but I actually used pin 4, like 6 for the ground, and then 7 for the white one. And I could put a little diagram if it helps. And that's all it really takes. to connect the PIR sensor, and again, I didn't have any trouble. Mine works just fine right out of the box. So if you're like me and you're prone to putting things on your computer using a USB stick, and you plug it in, then you should get this little pop-up screen here. But if for some reason you get rid of it, it can be difficult for a new Linux user to know where to go to find it again. So I found it under Media Pi, and that's where you go to get it. But another thing you could do is just unplug it, plug it back in, and that little pop-up will come back up again. Hope that saves somebody time searching around for where their USB info is. So I think the best way to run this program is to make sure you put all the files just in one location. And also, you'll see I put mine under Halloween, but then you have to dig a little. I renamed some of the folders because they're so long and you have to type in all this stuff. It helps you not make some mistakes. I made a few mistakes and I didn't know where I was making them, and I have to keep trying it over and over again. So ULND may sound cryptic, but it's just an acronym for what it originally was. I think it's called Up, Lady, Nightmare, Debutante. So I wanted to keep the sort of meaning there because, as you can see, there are different versions when you buy from Atmos FX. So that in case you want to play it on a TV versus a monitor versus a projector or something like that. So I didn't want to confuse them. So I renamed this one TNF_V because, again, might be easy to type. And in there I've placed the Python script that's running and then the file that it's going to run, and I can then just run it by going to terminal. And you'll see it says pi at hector, so I'll move that a little bit more central. It says pi at hector, which tells me that I'm in the pi directory. So if I want to get into where I am now, I just have to go cd, which stands for change directory, space, and in this case, Halloween is the next folder up, and it went there. I like to go one at a time because if I type 6 of them and it doesn't go, I don't know which one stopped it. So I'm just going to go one at a time. So cd space ULND would be the next one, and I'm just following the tree over here, and that seems to work. cd space TNF_V. Although the fact that I've shortened them does make it a little bit easier to type in at length if necessary. So I think I'm in the actual folder I need to be in, so all I have to do now is run what he had put on his to actually get the Python script to work, which is Python 3 space living underscore portrait underscore player, and that's the part he forgot, dot py, and then the name of the file you're going to run in that space, and I've named it lady_v, and that's working. And there she is in all of her beauty. So when you run it, this might be a problem that you have where it doesn't quite fill the screen. You'll notice there's empty space down here, and she looks fine, but you want to fill the space because it won't look like a portrait otherwise, right? So what you do, I'm going to Control-C to get out of that, is if you open it I'm going to open it again. If you just go to the script and you double-click on it, unlike Microsoft, it won't run that. It'll actually just open it in a text editor like that. And then you can go in here and populate the length and the width. But if I then go in and say I want, I don't know, I want to change that to say 1024, which might fill the screen, and then I run it again, she does indeed fill the screen, but you may notice she's gotten kind of fat. And the reason for that is, although I got it to fill my screen because my screen resolution was equal to that, I didn't keep the same proportions that the picture had before. So what I did simply was took what would the 1280 need to be in the same proportion to the 1024 that it definitely needs to be. And I've already done that math a while ago, and it's 1640. So I'll save that, and then I will go in and run it again. And there you go. She looks normal, and she fills the screen. So you just have to do a little math to figure out what your screen resolution is and to make it fit, but stay in proportion. So for sound, you have a few options. They make things called shields, which actually are plug-in boards for the Raspberry Pi that can accomplish all kinds of things, and one of them is an amplifier. But because I'm using some of these pins, I'm not sure if that would work, and of course that would be extra money and so forth. The second most obvious would be just to use the 3.5 millimeter output that is right there on the board. But that's not as easy as it may sound. That is actually not an audio output. It's actually a composite audio video output. I guess it's selectable or something. If you look here, I hope that's in focus. These two connectors are not the same. The one on the right is a normal 3.5 millimeter audio jack. The one on the right, and you can see the difference, it's got 3 here, and this connector, I don't know what it's called, has 4. You need one that has the 4. And worse than that, not all 4s are created equally. Sometimes a couple of these are actually switched, so you have to get the right 4. I tried these and they didn't work in my board. You'd think the audio is on the tip. You'd think if it was on the tip it wouldn't matter, but I guess it depends on where it picks up the ground. So that wasn't too good of an option. For none of them were really working for me, but if you find the right one, I bet you could probably use that 3.5 millimeter port. Instead, I chose to use the audio that came out of the HDMI. It goes into the adapter that turns it to VGA for my monitor, but it also has an audio output, and I just plugged a regular 3.5 millimeter into that, and then into a set of computer speakers with a little woofer, and they're amplified. You're going to need an amplified source. This doesn't give you any amplification. And I think those all will work just fine. You just have to choose the method that works for you. So apparently I didn't shoot any video, or not much video anyway, of the frame for my haunted picture. What I did was I went to Home Depot and I bought some trim. Excuse me. And it was just one piece. I think it was only like $7 or $8. It was pretty cheap, and you can see on the back here it's sort of white. It's actually PVC, and you can even see some of the blue PVC glue that I used. It was just basically plumbing glue. I was able to miter the corners pretty well, and I just sprayed it gold, and so it came out as a very nice frame. It's a lot more basic than the frame I showed you earlier. And then I just put a couple of pieces of wood on here so that it just slides on and just sits on the outside of the monitor. So for the PIR sensor, as I showed earlier, I took apart an old broken caulk gun and used this piece to make it look a little like one of those lights that's on the top of one of the photos. And you know, I thought about buying one, but they're really expensive, and this was obviously dirt cheap. And you can see there's a bit of a cutout over here, so it doesn't look like 100% perfect. You can even see where I welded through the paint, but I don't think it's anything anybody's going to notice. And this is just a piece of, I think it's from a toilet plumbing. It's copper line that's got a silver coating on it. I kind of crimped it there, which isn't good. I bent it with a brake line, but not until I'd messed it up a couple times. So, but anyway, the wires for the PIR go through that. And then on the back side, I took some junk I had laying around in the garage and welded up this sort of tripod. This little screw adjusts how far back this comes, and it's just bolted onto the monitor where the old stand used to bolt, because it's, of course, rotated 90 degrees. And then I used some screw holes back here to attach the board. It goes on, I think, kind of like that. Goes on kind of like that. But it's not good for me because the HDMI gets kind of butts up against there. It doesn't quite make the turn. So I'm going to have to just bolt it a little bit differently. And that's no big deal, though. It's just to mount it out of the way so people don't actually see it. And that's about it. That's the end of the video. I apologize for the length. I swear I'm working on it. Hopefully I can bring these things down. But I did want to cover a lot of the little tiny issues that sort of hung me up, in hopes that it helps somebody out there who wants to do this project. So I'll leave you now with the finished product.